We have a very different field than we had last week at the Players' Championship on tap for this week at the Honda Classic because there are some big names for sure. We got guys like Daniel Berger, Joaquin Niemann, Sung J M, guys we can lean on and feel pretty good about for DFS. The problem is what happens after you get past those guys, and things fall off pretty quickly this week. On top of that, there is a lot of wind in the forecast at a PGA National, so we're going to break things down from a DFS perspective and let you know how those factors are impacting our view of this week. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, joined here as always by Brandon Gdula. He is the managing editor for numberFire.com. Brandon, the Honda Classic coming up this week. How are you doing?
I'm all right. I was hoping John Rahm could get it done at the Players, but he wasn't really in contention, but he could have been. I liked a lot what I saw from him. But I mean, it was like a solid. I think I just had high expectations for Sunday, so I was still a little let down from that. And then we roll into this field to break down. But I mean, I guess what do you expect when you jam an event between the Players and a WGC event? So just kind of. But hey, look. Yeah, maybe the golfers aren't as good, but we still get the same chances for our daily fantasy lineups for our bets. I mean, what does it really matter how good the fields are? It's all relative anyway, right?
The money's the same, and that's what mattered for sure. I sent you a screenshot of my player pool from last week, and it was essentially either guys who missed the cut or guys who were top 10. There was the one guy, like literally one guy who was in between is Joaquin Niemann. Like that was it. It was not enjoyable because it's one of those events where like, okay, I actually found upside, which is I think if I were to identify my flaws as a PGA DFS player, I am not good at accounting for upside. I think that's my biggest issue here. I actually found some guys who had upside, but it didn't matter because I had so many dudes like Webb Simpson missing the cut. And like, it was not super enjoyable as a result of that. So I'm happy to wipe the slate clean and move on to the Honda Classic. I just wish it were the field where I feel better about my lineups because initial looks here, the 9,000 range is one of the most underwhelming 9,000 ranges I've seen in my entire life. And it's pretty thin at the top. So we're going to break things down here, let you know where we are leaning for DFS, let you know where we actually do see value we like coming up in just a bit. But first, a quick reminder, if you did not tune in last night, our NCAA men's basketball preview for this year's tournament is now posted here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast. We'd also have a video version over on the FanDuel YouTube page. We broke down this year's field, talked about how we're handling Gonzaga as a favorite, how we're talking about, looking at the other Final Four contenders, potential upsets, and general strategies based on pool size. The analysts there were Dr. Ed Feng, Aaron Dolan, and Bennett Corcoran of numberFire, getting you set. I gave no insights because I had no insights with college basketball, but they gave their insights. They're very smart, broke things down. I'm feeling pretty good about my bracket after listening to them. So find that by searching for the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed or by going to the FanDuel YouTube page and checking that out. Also, a lot of good stuff here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Of course, Tom Vecchio has you covered with daily NBA and NHL with the Daily ISO. Austin Swain doing UFC stuff for us. I will have NASCAR later this week for Atlanta. Also, our first episode of the Solo Shot for this year going up later this week. I talked to Ozzie Smith, Baseball Hall of Famer, talked to him about a lot of different stuff, having fun while playing baseball, defensive metrics, different things. A bet he had with his manager that was the reverse of how we view launch angle right now. So that'll be up out here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed later this week. Make sure you are subscribed. And also, if you like what you hear, leave us a rating and review because why not? It takes 2 seconds. It helps out a lot. So we do appreciate that for sure. But for now, let's take a look here at the Honda Classic. It is at PGA National, the champion course, 7,125 yards. It is a par 70. Why are you laughing? I can hear you.
Because You said like four things. I was like, oh, I could chime in, but you didn't stop.
I don't want to listen.
And it's like, now do I say like about a thought I had about what you said about Gonzaga?
Okay, talk about Gonzaga.
No,
you're running the show here. I give up. You're hosting the rest of the podcast. I quit.
No, I don't know. I don't know how it works. I don't want to interject, but then I make myself.
I don't care. You can interrupt.
Well, you said
all the time. You can interrupt me whenever you want.
We talked about Gonzaga, and you like paused a little bit and said the rest of the field, and I was thinking like, yeah, you talked about Gonzaga and the rest because it's basically everyone's just on Gonzaga, so nobody cares about the rest. I was gonna say, I mean, hey, everyone knows how I feel about launch angle, so. I don't know. I had a few others in there, but I didn't get a chance to say them, so I had to at least laugh to myself. I'll mute myself next time, though.
Again, you have full leeway to interrupt me whenever because I do this to you all the time. I interrupt you all the time, so feel free whenever you need to. 144 golfers in the field for this week for the Honda Classic. There will be a traditional cut after the first two rounds. Top 65 plus ties will make it. Let us hope things are not as bloody this week as they were last week. But they might be because one of the underlying things we'll be talking about for today is weather. Weather is gross for this week at the Honda Classic and the PGA National. Wind speeds, usually we do weather later on, but I think it's important to talk about it now because the winds will start out around 10 miles per hour Thursday, up to 15 miles per hour by 10 a.m. So you got to be out there really early to take advantage of the 10 miles per hour before it goes up to 15. It will stay around 15 the rest of the day. Friday, tiny bit more calm, like 12 miles per hour instead of 15. May dip a tiny bit later in the round, so there is a slight edge to those teeing off early Thursday, but it's not a big enough edge where I feel like you have to roll with it. Winds will be 10 miles per hour early Saturday, 15 miles per hour in the afternoon, and then 15 to 20 miles per hour all day Sunday. So I'm talking to you about your key stats, Brandon. I want to say right now, I do have wind splits on my sheet for this week, whereas I usually do not. What I have is you can go to Fantasy National. You can take a look and split based on tournaments where it is windy AF is how they phrase it. I have that in my sheet to see who does well playing in the wind. The numbers I have are strokes gained tee to green. I know that putting is different in the wind too, so I probably could have gone total strokes gained in the wind, but I did decide to go tee to green just personally. Before you talk about key stats for the Honda Classic in general, how would you be looking to play things based on the wind here this weekend?
So I usually wait to hear what you say because I don't look at weather. It's like my biggest weakness when it comes to golf. Just because I've had bad experiences in the past trying to predict, waves. But if we do get a read that, look, it's better to have the early round on Thursday. With how, and especially with how this field is I think that the main distinction. This is not the kind of a field where I have like locked in plays at this point. Right. It is very, very nebulous. It's still evolving. So for me, I will give more credence to wave splits for this week, but that's really has a lot to do with the fact that I'm not super sold on, most of the golfers outside like the top, I think you said 7. That's probably about right for me as well.
Yeah, someone was asking me Russell Henley on YouTube, and I think that Henley is kind of where it falls off for me is after him, because then it gets into golfers who, like we talk about having red flags, and usually that's like, oh, they're not great around the green, they're not great, maybe they're not the best putters, but like these are dudes who like just don't hang from a ball striking perspective, and that's a lot tougher to get to. And we'll talk about the shortcoming of Henley too when you talk about your key stats, but I think there is a pretty deep fall off after that. The one other alteration I would say based on the wind for this week is it makes it tougher for me to swallow the chalk because wind can increase volatility, even if it's not like with a certain wave. It can just have a big increase in making things a bit more random. So I say that while also acknowledging there isn't a deep pool of players I want to use at the top. So while I do want to be more wary of the more popular plays as a result of the wind, I might not be able to deviate with the studs. If there is a value play who emerges who will be very popular and I like them, I'm going to pivot off of them because of wind. I don't know if I'll get off of, Daniel Berger, Joaquin Niemann because of wind, because I don't see a lot of alternatives I can go to instead. So I think there is increased credence in fading what winds up being popular. I just don't know if I can do that with the studs. I think that it does lend itself to a more contrarian approach when things could get pretty wild throughout this week.
Yeah, I looked at the past optimals here, and there weren't really any takeaways. I think maybe the main takeaway is that they actually, despite being high variance and despite being like difficult, the three past optimal lineups on FanDuel for the Honda Classic spent at least 58,900. So, we can see a lot of optimal lineups actually wind up with like in the 52,000 range, just because if certain guys pop at like 7K, and the top of the top doesn't really come through. We can see these lineups not use a lot of the salary, but again, that's a pretty high number for the optimals, and there are on average so it was 3, 2, and 4 golfers at or above 10,000. So it's like if 3 of your golfers are at or above 10,000 in a field, that does kind of say stars and as we would say stars and scrubs, but only one golfer was below 7,000. That was Mackenzie Hughes last year when he was runner up at 7K, and so it's like a weird modified balance. But although we talk about this sometimes too on FanDuel, you don't have to play very many golfers in the 7,000 range. I say sometimes that I feel guilty that I don't talk about more of those like super low end plays, but you can build a lineup between like 10K and above and like in the 8K range. Skip over the 9K range, which is kind of what we've seen here. And I think based on how this particular 9K range shapes up, that's probably the main takeaway for me this week.
I agree, because what I was talking to you about on Slack yesterday was I don't think there's a difference between the high 9,000 range and the low 9,000 range. And I also would say there's not a huge difference between the high 9,000 range and the high 8,000 range. So that to me says I think the 3 at 10K or higher is probably the way I'll wind up going. And then living in that high 8,000 range after that. Because I think there are some fine plays in the high 8,000 range. I'd agree with that. As far as key stats for this week at PGA National, which ones stand out to you as being important from a DFS perspective?
So like not a whole lot stands out as so. The more I think about key stats, the more I'm like, we say strokes gained approach every single week is number one, and it's not always more important at a particular course that we're discussing than it is overall. But you still can't take away that it's the most predictable. And the most predictive, and the stat that gives you the ability tee to green to gain the most strokes. So strokes gain approach is still number one for me this week, even though it's about as impactful as it is on the average course. But what we do see, and I know this can be a little bit confusing, but according to Data Golf, strokes gain approach explains about 40% of the scoring dispersion for PGA National compared to about 35% on average. So what's actually separating the scores for these golfers at PGA National is how they play with their irons. That's effectively what that means. So it kind of means that it's more important than usual, but it's not quite the same. So I know it's a little confusing, but it's still number one for me anyway. And really what I came down to was like looking at one stat that doesn't matter, because they all kind of do matter to the like PGA average. It would be driving accuracy. That showed up as not as important, even though you'll see some places think that it is very important to put the ball in the right place, and it is. But that has not actually led to differentiation, better play for certain golfers at PGA National. So it's actually a reversal too from TPC Sawgrass, which is, it might have played out, although like Bryson was still up there. JT obviously won, not the most accurate golfers necessarily, but one thing that stands out to me is that the past 3 winners at PGA National, Sungjae Im, Keith Mitchell, and Justin Thomas, they finished 6 under, 9 under, and 8 under, so all single digits under par. And over the past 11 years, only 5 golfers finished at least 10 under here. 3 of them did it in 2012 when Rory won at 12 under. 2 more guys were 10 under. So expect it to be tough. And so when courses play tough, I look for quote unquote better golfers, but also well-rounded golfers That's the key distinction for me. Is I want to see some well-roundedness in my golfers, but also if there aren't a ton of birdie chances, more of your fantasy scoring is going to come from finishing positions. So really, what it comes down to for me is like kind of getting the best all-around golfers I can, which in a bad field, we can call this like a bad field, it can be difficult, but that makes those guys like Daniel Berger, Sungjae Im, Joaquin Niemann at the top stand out so much more. So my key stats for this week are strokes gained approach, driving distance, strokes gained around the green, strokes gained putting. We have Bermuda this week, and bogey avoidance as opposed to birdie or better rate.
One thing you mentioned there was seeing that some places have mentioned accuracy as being more important. I've seen that as well. But if you look back at golfers who have done well here in the past, it's not a lot of guys who are – you don't see a lot of guys who are short off the tee measure up super well. Last year, Russell Henley was the top finishing guy who was outside the top 100 in driving distance. In 2019, Kyung-Hoon Lee was the top finisher there. And then in 2018, Webb Simpson did well, but like Webb's kind of, he's different. He's just all around too good. So I did get a similar conclusion that distance matters a decent amount this way. I'm not sure if it's because of the length people are talking up accuracy as being important, but based on the numbers of data golf and based on the numbers that I look at where golfers rank for the full season of the PGA Tour, it does seem as if we should value distance over accuracy. I would say that I'm not going to write off golfers who are not necessarily long if they are really good. Like I mentioned Russell Henley as being someone I think is a viable play this week. He's not going to grade out well there, but because he does everything else so well, and there aren't a lot of guys who do that this week, I think that that's where I can still get on him despite that.
Yeah, I mean, 2 par 5s, I think when people see that, they say distance doesn't matter, but that's not quite the case. And just because we're talking about Russell Henley, I like him a lot. I already bet him. So,
last week was not as enjoyable as I was expecting out of Russell Henley. He was one of the Carnage boys, which definitely ruined my week, but bounce back spot here for Henley. So we're both looking at distance as being a factor for this week. Approach, obviously the big one, but then also finding golfers who won't implode at a difficult course for sure. We don't think of difficult courses a lot when we see lesser fields, but I think that's the case for this week for sure, where we do have a lesser field and a difficult course. We want golfers who are going to avoid implosion for this week. We'll talk about golfers who have done well at PGA National in the past in just 1 second. But first, here's a number for you, 701. That is how many days we've gone without March tournament action. But guess what? That drought is almost over. So why not go all out this year with a huge new TV from Best Buy? You can find great deals on big screen TVs from brands like Samsung and LG. Best Buy will even bring it to you with fast, free curbside pickup and delivery. For more details, visit bestbuy.com. Let's take a look at golfers who have done well here in the past, starting off with Ricky Fowler. He checks in at $10,100. Brandon, what do you see with Ricky? Mid-range salary in a rough field, which I think is indicative of where Ricky is at right now.
Yeah, that was a surprise. I didn't know really where his salary would wind up, but 10-1 would fit the balance build, which I talk about a lot. I don't think this is the kind of week where I want to balance build because you're effectively cutting off, I think, too much of the win equity at the top with those, studs for this field, we'll call them. But Fowler missed the cut at the Players. Shot a 77-73 to go 6 over. The Friday was a lot better than Thursday. And, maybe returning to a course where he has excelled will help. But he did win the Players, so I don't know if, how that kind of balances out. But he has played the Honda Classic 11 times since 2010. He has made 7 cuts with 4 top 10s, 6 top 25s, so 2 more top 25s than missed cuts in that span. Did miss the cut last year, but as for the more recent form overall, he's gone 6th, win, cut, 2nd, and then that missed cut last year. His 2 missed cuts came by 1 shot, and then on the number though, he had another solid bounce back, 76-68. So yeah, I mean, if you want course form, he has it. The missed cuts have not been particularly terrible. In terms of just the scoring. The more recent data puts him in the 82nd percentile and weighted and adjusted strokes gained tee to green. That's from like my database. I weight it for recency and for field strength. So 82nd percentile tee to green, but that is with 42nd percentile approach, even in this weak field. So that's the big concern. He is an elite Bermuda putter. So like, I'm not against Ricky specifically, but I don't think he fits for once. Someone at 10-1 doesn't really fit what I'm trying to do this week. Any thoughts on Ricky for you?
I actually think he does kind of fit broad, or that salary range fits broadly with what I want, because I do want, like I said, I think I want a third golfer at 10K or higher, and I was filling out a lineup earlier, and I can make that work for this week. I just don't think Ricky will be the guy I pick when I do so. And this may feel like semi-blasphemous, but I think if I'm in that range, like, I think Cameron Tringali is probably over salary, but I'd rather use Tringali than Fowler personally. I like Cameron Davis more than I like Ricky Fowler. Brendan Steele, but I do think that I'd put Tringali and Davis both above Fowler for me personally. And we'll talk about Doug Gim later on. He's also in that range. I think that I might potentially put him above Fowler too. He's right beneath him, but I think that I'm okay with this, with using a golfer in this range. I just don't think Fowler will be the guy specifically I go to when I do so.
Yeah, actually building in the top of my lineup, because I said probably where I'll wind up is roughly 3 golfers at 10K or above, maybe a little bit in the high 9s if there's anyone who jumps out, but it's probably going to be 10K, like just probably like very minimal exposure to the 9,000 range, which is usually where I live.
Yeah.
But I think even if I want like this. You can play Daniel Berger, Neiman, and Fowler, and you have 88-67 left for 3 golfers. I think for this field, that's totally justifiable.
I definitely don't have almost that exact lineup minus Fowler.
We'll move on. Yeah.
We'll talk about Sungjae Im. He is the defending champion of this event and one of the betting favorites this week, and I think for good reason. So it seems like a guy we should discuss. Let's do that right now. Sungjae won that event while gaining just 1 stroke putting, and he did that because he gained 12.3 tee to green, 6.2 in approach. Pretty good. And the putting could have been even better because Sungjae mops up on Bermuda. He ranks 4th there over the past 100 rounds per Fantasy National. Sungjae coming off a 17th at the Players, but that was largely fueled by putting. He gained 4.6 putting there compared to just 0.2 on approach. He did gain 4.2 off the tee, so it wasn't all putting, but it definitely helped a lot. We talked about Sungjae's approach as being spotty going into last week's event, and didn't really alleviate concerns in that event, but this is not the same field. It's not an elite field, so the approach would get a boost as a result of the competition. But like it's still a concern, I would say. So how are you viewing Sungjae Im here at 11-8 for this field?
I like him. I think we should just probably posit that Daniel Berger is our favorite golfer. I would assume. I don't want to speak for you.
No, you're good. You can speak for me.
The salary is not high enough for how much better he is than the rest of the field. And I want to make that clear. So it's hard to like love Sungjae by comparison and for just 200 less in salary. But I mean, I like Sungjae, and I think that he's very much in play. He would be someone who I'm going to sort of build around. I would imagine of the like 8 or so studs. If we throw, I guess Taylor Gooch in there, might be 8. I'm probably going to pick 3 to 4. Probably 3 from the 10-8 and above, and then someone else down in like the 10K range, just to build around. And Sungjae is definitely a part of that with Berger and Neiman. So, that's where I am with him. I don't think he's a must play because of the irons really not being that great.
I was talking before about how there weren't a lot of alternatives in the top end where, like, if I get the read that Berger will be super popular, I'd pivot because, like, I do want to pivot because of the wind. I think that if there is a massive discrepancy in the popularity between Berger and Neiman, or in Im, I would go to it then. Like, then I think Sungjae makes a lot of sense because he's close enough to that tier. Are you seeing fan share tags right now?
Yeah. So it's early, so these numbers will change. But according to fansharesports.com, Daniel Berger has 22 tags. Sungjae Im has 9. Lee Westwood 10. Joaquin Neiman 24. Adam Scott 10, and then Shane Lowry 20. So it's looking like the chalky picks of the top would be Berger, Neiman, and Lowry at this point.
So I want to deviate from the chalk, but my two favorites are Berger and Neiman. Seems great. I'm kind of shocked by that, given that Sungjae won this event last year. In my head, there's always a bump for past winners, and like, I would assume that's probably true, but I feel like whenever we look at the fan share tags, we don't see that. Like, maybe people are just smart enough to like overlook a finish. I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a little bit surprising that the gap is so large.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it's hard not to like Berger, Neiman. I understand the Lowry. I'll talk about him in just a bit. So I understand it. And someone like they can't all be talked up. So someone's got to kind of fall off. And I could see why Sungjae.
I think that if we continue to track it, if it continues to track like that, then if I have a single entry lineup, I could see myself going with Sungjae over Berger there. So keeping a close eye on the tags this week for sure, because I think they're at least close enough to the same tier where you could justify doing so if you think there's a massive gap in popularity. Let's talk about Byung-Hun An, one of our heat check favorites here. He is $9,600, and our guy did not have a fun week last week, and he may still be on 17, plunging balls in the water. He did respond well to it on Twitter, to his credit, because he has a tremendous Twitter game. But a good bounce back spot potentially here, because this is a course at which he has done well. Can he do well enough to overcome the demons of his short game? I think we can write off what happened last week as being just a really tough hole and a rough event. But what do you see with Byung-Hun An overall?
Yeah, so he's gonna be bad in my modeling because I weight more recent performance, and he lost like 9 strokes
on one hole
approach over 2 rounds. Yeah, but like it was pretty abysmal. But I said that he made waves on 17 last week. He had an 11 on Thursday. Was 18 over through 2 rounds. I can't imagine, although I didn't check his name specifically, I can't imagine he'll have a lot of interest this week as a result. But I mean, like, he had a short week at the Players, so he had extra time to prep for this weaker field, and he's played here the past 3 years. Starting with last year, he was 4th, 36th, and 5th, so 2 top 5s. He has gained at least 8.4 strokes tee to green in all 3 of those starts, with at least 2 strokes gained off the tee and an average of 4.2 strokes gained from approach. It's exactly what we look for. He's actually gained putting in 2 of them, which led to the top 5 finishes. So, like, Byung-Hun An with a putter is a very, very good player. So, like, there is some reason to be in on Ben An at 9,600, but he still is a terrible putter. So you can't just say he's going to putt well. Although it is promising that he has putted well here in the past. But does he jump out to you at all?
I think that he at least has my attention, I would say, just because it comes down to what we were talking about before, where there aren't a lot of guys in this range who I would expect to actually have good numbers ball striking. And if you can separate from the field in that department, it gives you more leeway to be a bad putter. So I think that he is viable despite the putting because how good he can be elsewhere. But I think that the putting prevents him from being like a priority in what is a pretty bad range. I will say that, like, if I wind up in the $9,600 range, there are pretty good odds that I wind up using Byung-Hun An just because the ball striking can't be so good. But I think my preference would be to avoid the tier entirely. Is that kind of where you're at as well?
Yeah, I just think that I'm mostly not going to be there. I usually am trying to get. Usually we see a big distinction between the low 9,000 and the high 9,000, and I'm trying my best to get up to like 96 and above. This week I don't quite see that, and I'm okay more being in the lower 9K range. So probably not going to have anyone in terms of substantial exposure between like 96 and 99.
That may make our next golfer a quick discussion because he's also in this range. It's Windham Clark at $9,700, and it's a course where we want to emphasize distance, and I think that Clark has shown why that may be valuable his first 2 trips here. He was here in 2019. He finished 7th in that one. Got there by gaining 8.8 strokes putting. He was actually at 0.0 tee to green. Don't see that very often as far as the top 10 finish. And last year was a bit similar. He gained 4.6 putting, finished 11th, but he did at least gain 3 on approach. He lost 0.6 off the tee. But I think the approach play there is interesting because he's not a good approach player overall. He ranks 127th in the field there the past 50 rounds. Clark lost 5.1 in approach at the Players last week, but he can go long. He can putt well in Bermuda. Like those putting performances are within his range of outcomes because he's actually a good Bermuda putter. So it's not like that was totally fluky. Do the distance and putting do enough for you, Brandon, to get you in on Clark as one of those rotational plays at $9,700?
Probably not. Although I will say Data Golf has a course fit tool, and they show which golfers should kind of see the biggest boost to their strokes gained based on the course fit. And he's second in the field. Really say first because plus 0.13 because the accuracy is de-emphasized. So I understand the case for it. It just doesn't really fit. Again, my lineup construction. So I don't want to dismiss it just because of that, but I think that that's not the right way to build this week.
Would you go with him, or let's say you have 97 and you really love your other 5 and don't want to rebuild? Would you go on or Clark?
Clark. Do I have to?
I mean, yeah, because you really love those other 5 and you can't reconfigure. I would probably go on by a tiny bit, but if you were to ask me hey, do you want to do a bet on these 2? I would say no, because I have no conviction in it. I think the overall takeaway is even guys who we don't mind in this 9,000 range are tough sells. So avoid it if you can. I think that's the overall takeaway here. Let's take a look at golfers who are golfing well right now and talk about a couple more guys at the top end of this year. We kind of round things out as far as the top end goes. Starting off with Shane Lowry. You'll talk about him. I'll talk about Lee Westwood. Lee Lestwood is not a person. Lee Lestwood is a pretty decent spoonerism, though, so we can talk about that. But you talk to me about Shane Lowry. I'll talk about Westwood. Then we can talk about this top tier outside of guys like Berger and Sungjae.
Yeah, I know we're really lingering a lot on the top, but I think it's important to get it right because even with the volatility, we have seen the best guys linger in weak fields like this, specifically at the Honda. So I think it's relevant. Shane Lowry, coming off an 8th place finish at the Players, that came after a missed cut when he was very dreadful on the greens at the Arnold Palmer. But during the January-February turn, he had top 30s on the European Tour in Dubai and at the Saudi. So pretty solid for this field. The adjusted data for him is very good. Tee to green, this only includes his PGA Tour stats, but a 97th percentile adjusted strokes gained. Tee to green in my database. So one of the best tee to green players, and he plays really well in the wind. Something you alluded to. He is 4th in the field in windy conditions over the past 50 rounds, according to Fantasy National. He is 18th off the tee, specifically. So I think that I would probably put more weight into the off the tee numbers in the wind than anything else. But again, 4th overall, pretty good. So, but he's one of those guys who's in the top on FanShare, getting a lot of buzz. So I like the case for Lowry, but I'm not necessarily sold on him. So talk to me about Westwood, and we'll figure out this top range.
Yeah, Westwood coming off back-to-back runner-up finishes. They came at the Players and the Arnold Palmer. So good fields, still finishing runner-up. Really impressive there for Westwood. And I think that's worth discussing because he didn't luck his way into either finish because he gained 7.3 tee to green last week, 13.2 the week before that. He has gained an average of 1.6 off the tee across those 2 events, 5.4 on approach, and 3.3 around the green. Pretty good across the board for Lee Westwood. But the week before that, at the WGC Workday, he lost 9.2 tee to green, and he's been wildly up and down for the past 2 years. He is on the up part now. That's good. He's 11.5. But Brandon, we always talk about not buying into highs like this on older golfers, and Westwood's about double the age of the guys we talk about as far as buying into their surges. So how are you handling Westwood and Lowry I mean, Lowry's different because, like, I think we've seen it do it more recently or more longer recently. I don't know, whatever the way to phrase that is. I believe more in Shane Lowry surge than Lee Westwood's. How are you viewing this second tier after Berger and Sungjae?
I don't dislike the second tier behind Berger and Sungjae. I don't specifically rate Lowry and Westwood at the top. I would prefer Joaquin Niemann pretty easily. And then I'm cool going back to Russell Henley and Taylor Gooch if I can throw Taylor Gooch in that conversation.
Yep.
The little bit of savings I get from there, I think, is justifiable. I could really come to regret saying, like, yeah, just play Taylor Gooch instead of Lee Westwood or Adam Scott or Shane Lowry. But I think the more recent stats overall put me on those other guys. So I'm not really on Westwood. I'm not really on Shane Lowry now because of the popularity. Yeah. So
I think that if we go back to the discussion about deviating from what's popular as a result of the wind, if I don't deviate, I go Berger Niemann. If I do have to deviate, the deviation from Berger is Sungjae as of right now, and the deviation from Niemann would be Henley for me. I think that I'd rather just dip down to Henley as being the top alternative there.
Yeah, Henley's getting the buzz though too now.
Yeah. But maybe I'll just stick with Niemann.
I mean,
like, I guess if my motivation in not using Joaquin Niemann is deviating from the chalk, I can't justify going to Westwood or Lowry because the marginal popularity between them and Niemann will not offset the gains I get in going with them.
Yeah, someone's going to emerge. I would assume Berger is going to be like 40+%. Sure. So it'll be a little bit flatter behind that, but I think the real takeaway from going over the top is there actually are a lot of viable options, despite the rest of the field not being particularly great. And it's kind of looking like Sungjae M is going to be somewhat forgotten, which is a little bit surprising.
Do you prefer Gooch or Henley at the top of the 10,000 range?
Probably Henley just for like the high end, which is a little bit. It's a little hard to say because I want balanced golfers, and that's why I talk about Taylor Gooch all the time. But with Henley's irons are, I would have to rate him a little bit better, and it has better long-term adjusted form in my database. So I'd lean him.
I agree. I prefer Henley. So keep track of the buzz we're seeing around these top-end guys. Decide if you want to deviate based on your playing style, because just my playing style is I might have to because of the wind, but your playing style may differ. So I think that to me, the alternative is Sungjae M. I think that's kind of the key takeaway here is what you said too. Yeah,
and so let's say Daniel Berger's 40%, 45%. You can still play Daniel Berger, but if you're going to do that, don't play all of the other chalky picks throughout. All it really takes in a field like this is to play, one unpopular play, maybe two unpopular plays in the value range, or pair Berger with like Sungjae, because that's going to be probably a unique combination if people aren't playing Sungjae outright. So it's not, when we talk about that, it's never to say you have to fade these popular guys 100%. It's not how it works, but it is a lot easier to build unique lineups for tournaments whenever you are just not having any exposure to someone who's in 40% of all the lineups anyway. So,
and that's why you hear a lot of talk of aggregate roster rates as opposed to looking across all 6 spots as opposed to just one, adding it up there. So if you do decide to go with Berger, make sure you are finding ways to deviate from the or other Berger lineups, because you don't want to compete against that many lineups as you would be if you decide to go, if you go Berger Niemann, which again is my optimal way, you're going to be in line with a lot of people, and you want to, because if you think about it 2 ways, you are competing against a larger chunk of the field, which means you have to beat more lineups to win, but also there's a larger chance you split the pot, and that lowers your expected value of each individual lineup a lot. There is a lot of value in having a unicorn lineup that no one else has. You're taking 2 hits to your expected value if you decide to go Berger Niemann or whatever you think the more likely combo will be.
Yeah, and you can sum up your expected popularity numbers, or you can do a product of it, and that gives you, if you are chalky but you have someone at 1%, it's going to show up as super unique. So you can kind of do it either way, but again, if you're this, I think is a good week to test some of the game theory stuff, because the process at a difficult field with a weak field below the studs, I think game theory is going to come into play.
Absolutely. So let's move on to other golfers who are popping right now, starting off with a guy in the low 9,000 range, right in the area where I think the 9,000 range starts to become more intriguing again. So talk to me about Matt Jones, $9,100, probably in a salary tier we will be in a decent amount for this week. Is he someone who stands out to you?
Who?
Matt Jones?
So we've talked about him a few times, and the salary, I think, like you said, is, I said I'm not really going to be in the 9,000 range, but 9,100 is like, I'm not saying if you are in the 9, if you have a 9 in front of your salary, I will not play you. That's not what I'm getting at. But it's a good number for him in this field. His past 5 starts include a 30th in Phoenix, 34th at Pebble Beach, 8th at the Genesis, missed the cut at the Arnold Palmer, 55th at the Players. He's done most of it through like a very scattered approach, not scattered approach numbers, although that's kind of factored in there. It's a lot of like, you can't say, oh, he's doing well because of the putting or because of the irons. It's like different things each week, but that's actually kind of a good thing in a way for a field like this, at a course like this. Very good Bermuda putter, 91st percentile in bogey avoidance over the past 100 rounds in this field, according to Fantasy National. I don't really love like anybody outside of the top like 8 or so. So I'll be sprinkling, rotating through the rest of the field. Jones is at a salary where I can kind of get back up to, especially if I do go with some golfers in like the lower 8K range. But does he do anything for you?
Yeah, I think he does, just because of what you alluded to, where he can do well via multiple paths. Like if his approach play kind of goes in line with the larger numbers, he can make up for with the putting. He's a good distance golfer as well. But sometimes the approach is on. So I see the aggregate ranking in approach play. It's not going to be a positive 84th in approach. That stands out in a not ideal way. But distance, putting, pretty good at avoiding bogeys, which I think is valuable for this week as well. So I actually do think that Jones is fine. I was looking in that range, and like Kevin Strowman, podcast favorite, is right there. And my initial lean was Strowman because the approach play is so much better. And I might still wind up on Strowman, but I don't think it's as definitive as I initially thought, just because Jones is better than Strowman in like every other department. And at some point that matters too. So I actually think that Jones is someone who will wind up in my player pool for this week, despite initially being turned off by that aggregate approach number.
Yeah, I would lean Strowman.
Yeah, like I said,
I should never, ever lean Strowman over anybody because of the putting, but I think it's close. I think this is where, like you said, the 9K range picks back up. So, like, I'm cool with Jones. I'm cool with Strowman. But I'm just, I think I'm like kind of laser focused on my construction for the week.
And I think that with those guys, it goes back to what you said, where you don't love anyone outside the top 8. So you want to commit to your studs, rotate from there. I could see Strowman and Jones both being rotational plays, but I don't want to commit to either for sure. Mm-hmm. Let's go back to that upper 9,000 range. Talk about another guy who's made some headlines recently. That's Doug Ghim. Really strong showing at the Players. 29th place finish there. Got some buzz during the week too, because, he was popping a bit. $9,800 this week, and you can kind of understand why. Because that wasn't the lone good performance for Ghim recently. He was also 36th at the Arnold Palmer, had a top 40 at the AT&T Pro-Am, the Farmers, and the American Express. And he's gained an approach in all 6 events since January 1st. Ghim has gained off the tee in 3 of those. Not a strength for sure. He ranks 49th in distance, 22nd in approach, 28th in scrambles gained per Fantasy National. The problem is that he's a really bad Bermuda putter. So this could be a flash in the pan. And I think that is a reason to be concerned with Ghim, and another reason to not be super enthused with this 9,000 range. How are you viewing him here at $9,800?
Not that into him. I think there are better plays at similar salaries. And I feel like I say that sometimes and don't clarify, but Cam Davis, Dylan Fratelli, I would say, specifically. So, like, for whatever that's worth. Yeah. For him, like, I think you nailed it with the Bermuda putting. That's what really is his lone red flag. His adjusted numbers, like across all of the stroke gain stats, there are no red flags. He's actually pretty solid. So it's less to do with him and more to do with liking a few other golfers above him, but also then stepping back and looking at Doug Gim at 9,800 in context of the rest of the field. And I can't build around Doug Gim and like Dylan Fratelli and still play Daniel Berger and Neiman and Im. Like it's not going to work. So
Right.
Unless I just punt, which, again, one golfer over the past 3 optimals was even in the 7,000 range, and that was Mackenzie Hughes, who's actually, I know we kind of don't talk about him
because
because
a 7,000 golfer.
Yeah.
He just happened to have a salary of 7,000 that week.
Yeah. So
as far as Gim goes, your counterpoint to the Bermuda putting could be, hey, he finished well at the Players last week, and the Players is also Bermuda, but he finished 29th because he lost 2.9 strokes putting. And that puts a pretty big dent in your ceiling. And I think that if I'm going to be in that range, I need ceiling. So not a player on my list for this week. Let's take a look at what the bookmakers are saying here based on the odds of FanDuel Sportsbook. Daniel Berger, the favorite, he is 11-1. Sung J M is 13-1, and a big fall off after that. Joaquin Neiman next up at 20-1. Lee Westwood and Shane Lowry are both 22-1. Another teardrop after them, down to Adam Scott and Russell Henley at 29-1. Taylor Gooch is 35, and Chris Kirk rounds out the top group at 37-1. So 2 very clear tiers here, and things fall off fast. We've talked about this a bit, but how does that alter your roster construction for this event, knowing that the fall off is significant?
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. Last week, it was a lot easier to build a balanced lineup because you get really good golfers at reasonable salaries. It maybe didn't work out the best because like JT and Bryson were the guys who really emerged. But it's a lot easier to go with a balanced build whenever there's a deep field. Whenever it's a top heavy field, that kind of goes out the window. And despite like I like the golfers again around 10K. I like Dylan Fratelli. I like Cameron Davis, Cameron Tringali. Like I could build a balanced lineup and feel good with it. But those guys are not quite on par with like Berger and Im and Neiman. So again, my lineup construction is very clearly going to be top heavy, but to clarify, like 10K and up, and then like 9K ish and below.
Yeah,
not 11K and up and 7K range.
Right. I'm in the same boat there because I think that. I think the overall thing for me is I want to avoid everyone between $9,400 and $99-ish $100. I would like to avoid everyone in that range as much as I can. I think that if I do get to the guys like Cameron Davis, who he's my player picks. I like him. But if I get there, they'll be as the 3rd golfer in my lineup, along with 2 of the top tier guys. That does lead to a very top heavy lineup, but I don't mind that this week, given how bad the 9,000 range is. So Cameron Davis works, and that range works, but it's after I get in 2 studs first.
Yeah, and you said between 94 and 99. Like that sounds like a super specific range, but it's 12 golfers. They're like it's 12 of like the top 30-ish in salary or whatever, like 28. I don't know, but that's like a pretty significant chunk of the quote unquote better golfers for the field that we're not that interested in.
And even some of the guys in the like 93, you could nitpick as well. So we'll talk about some of them later on in the player picks. But for first, which golfers' odds have shifted since things came out yesterday over at FanDuel Sportsbook?
There were multiple withdrawals. I won't remember all these off the top of my head, but like Doc Redman, Scott Piercy, Gary Woodland. It really screwed up things. But Adam Scott still fell from 22 to 29-1 on FanDuel Sportsbook. Your boy Doug Gim, my boy Dylan Fratelli, Matt Wallace, no one's boy this week, unfortunately. 45 to 65. JT Poston 50 to 65. Ian Poulter 55 to 70. Same as Windham Clark, Alex Noren, and Eric Van Rooyen. Ches Reavie 65 to 85, and then Harry Higgs was lingering last week, but 80 to 110. So basically, lots of guys lengthening, nobody in particular shortening.
Yeah, I think that kind of is indicative that we might not see any one golfer emerge as being chalk outside of Berger. I think that Berger, because of the odds, because of the salary, will be there, but I don't think anyone else will wind up being super popular for this week. Which lower salaried golfers have odds that stand out to you?
So there's Brandon Wu, 65 to 1 at 9,300. Ian Poulter, 70 at 95. KH Lee is 70 to 1 at 8,800. Eric Van Rooyen, Alex Noren, 75 each. Kevin Strowman, Michael Thompson, Luke List, Adam Long, Mckenzie Hughes, Russell Knox are all 80 to 1. So that's kind of what we're looking at.
A PSA where I've pushed back previously on you calling Ian Poulter my boy. I've decided to change that stance because after the first round of the Players last week, he had this Twitter video where he was sitting with Rory McIlroy and Tyrrell Hatton, and there was someone else there too, and he called them a bunch of Muppets because they were like 39 over.
He said Stenson just left.
Yeah, Stenson left. And him calling them Muppets in his I know that he's a grating personality overall, but his British accent's semi-endearing. So I've revised my stance. You can officially call Ian Poulter my boy again. I'm no longer as averse to it as I was previously. Just an official PSA from the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast with the letterhead on top. Ian Poulter, acceptable again.
I was going to do it regardless.
That was awful. We need to get rid of this. Let's move on to the player picks.
That was in English. That wasn't my British accent.
What was that?
That was Gil Faison from Oh Hello.
Oh, okay.
He's doing the CBS.
I haven't watched it in a while.
He's doing the CBS call.
Yeah, I don't remember. I don't remember the intricate plot points.
Well, you watched it.
That's Coach Steve. That's Coach Steve's voice. That's not Gil. That's Coach Steve. Get it right. Let's move on to the player picks here for the Honda Classic. Starting off with the studs based on the salaries over at FanDuel.com. Brandon, who stands out to you there this week?
Well, you got Daniel Berger, so I'm going to go Sungjae Im. Won here last year, is elite on Bermuda, which is something I talk about a lot for him. 97th percentile putting over the past 100 rounds compared to everyone's last 100 rounds. Leaves the field and adjusted stroke gained off the tee. More, not super long, but he'll get it done. 66th, well, that's hard to say, percentile with the irons, which is not great when you adjust for field and recency relative to this field, but really a good putter overall. We know that he's going to gain strokes off the tee. So, I mean, that checks out. He's not short. Obviously, he did enough to win here. So, anytime you do that, you can say that someone has the game to succeed, but is actually the best in the field at avoiding bogeys. So, I think that's the big... you can simplify everything and see who's accurate enough not to get into trouble, whose irons aren't terrible, who putts well enough, who's around the green game is viable so that they're not going to rack up double bogeys all week.
Yeah, I think that's a good pitch for Sungjae Im. And as mentioned, he would pivot off of Berger. But the reason that I'm saying pivot off of Berger is because I adore Daniel Berger. So let's talk about why now. There aren't a lot of guys in this field who don't have a lot of holes in their game, but Berger, at least for what I'm looking at this week, is one of those guys. He ranks top 40 in each of the key stats to me this week. 37th in distance, 11th in approach, 9th in scrambling, 29th in Bermuda putting. And in case the wind does get wild, he's also 5th in strokes gained tee to green in heavy winds. So the only reason, if this were a week where I didn't expect increased volatility due to weather, I would just swallow the chalk on Berger. And I may still wind up doing that, depending on what the forecast looks like on Wednesday night. That's the only reason I can see myself personally not going Berger. For a cash game, I would say Berger is the first guy I plug in there. What about for you? Would you go with Berger in a cash game too?
Oh, yeah. You just lock him in. He's so much better than the rest of the field. There's no disrespect to Neiman and Im and whoever else, but it's just he's so good. He's in the tier of he's at the bottom of the stud tier generally for me. So you put him in this field. I think that you just lock him in. The only reason you differentiate is because you're trying to game theory your way into a big tournament hit.
Okay, who else do you like here in this upper range?
I'm gonna go with Russell Henley. My models always love Russell Henley. They do again this week. He's the field leader in adjusted strokes gained approach and the 65th percentile in both long-term adjusted strokes gained putting on all surfaces and on Bermuda. So like that checks out. He's made 4 straight cuts at the course, was 8th last year. Missed the cut last week with some poor iron play, lost 2.9 strokes from approach, but was neutral elsewhere. So like, if there's one thing I've learned from digging into golf stats over the past like 3 or 4 years or whatever it's been now, don't put a lot of stock into one event, especially 2 rounds.
Yep, I agree. I think that Henley, as I said before, is the best pivot off of Joaquin Niemann if Niemann gets too chalky. Not sure if that'll happen, because I think that our read is correct, where Berger will probably wind up being the one guy who stands out. So I'm probably leaning towards still using Niemann. But let's talk about Niemann here. It just feels like he's under salaried. I think that that's kind of the vibe I'm getting him. He's 11-3, so he's not like he's not a value play, but I think he's under salaried still. I do like jamming in both him and Berger for cash games. Niemann just continues to play really good golf. He ranks 4th in the field in distance, 20th in approach, and 27th in scrambling. He's also 10th in heavy wins. The putting continues to get better. We've been talking about this a long time, so you're probably sick of hearing it, but like it is noteworthy because that was the one major hole in his game. He gained 3.3 on Bermuda last week, helped him finish 29th, even though the ball striking was not to Niemann's standards last week. So I think that's great. I have faith the ball striking will bounce back this week relative to this field. I think he has easy upside to win this event. His salary at 11-3 doesn't necessarily reflect that, so it will lead me, top heavy for sure to go Berger Niemann, but I think that's justified and the right way to approach things for this week. Any additional thoughts for you on Joaquin Niemann?
No, I think he's really good. I think he's kind of, just always, he's like popular, but he still seems underrated. So,
yeah, I agree. Let's move down to the mid-salary range. Again, kind of dicey for sure. But when you are in this range, Brandon, who are you turning towards?
I would be looking more toward the bottom than the top. And I'm going to go with someone we never talk about, but Mackenzie Hughes at 9,400. He's not someone who fits what we typically look for. He is a short game superstar, not a great ball striker. He is in the 38th percentile in adjusted strokes gained tee to green because he is 19th percentile off the tee, 26th percentile in approach. Where he does excel is with the short game. 91st percentile around the green, best long-term putter in the field, was runner-up last year with actually good iron play, so that checks out. And so I like to look at Mackenzie Hughes, guys like this, a little more whenever you don't have to go 20 under par. That's what I'm expecting this week based on everything. So I think he's more in play whenever safety is something that you can actually kind of generate from scrambling, which is not a great stat generally, but scrambling, making putts, things like that. So I think he gets a little bit of a boost. In
general, not a good stat. I think that there are exceptions to that. I think this is one of those exceptions because it is a very tough course. We want to keep that in mind. And it does partially encapsulate well-roundedness if you can make up for mistakes. I think that is valuable this week more so than others. So I think that is something to value. Probably not going to get me onto Hughes. I think your logic makes sense, but personally not someone I really see myself using because I just like to avoid, again, everyone between 9.4 and 9.9. The guy right above that is Cameron Davis. Let's talk about him. There are just so few good ball strikers in this field with both distance and approach. I think that it falls off pretty quickly after Cameron Davis at 10,000. He ranks 9th in distance and 14th in approach, so he will do well in those two arenas. And the putting isn't great, but it's also not a disaster, at least. He's 95th in Bermuda putting the past 100 rounds. He's coming off of back-to-back missed cuts, but in the Arnold Palmer, which is 2 weeks ago, he gained 2.5 in approach. So missed cuts are all made the same, and that one wasn't that bad. I just don't see many guys who will do well on their first couple of shots this week. Davis can do that, and he does so at a mid-range salary, and I think there's a drop-off after him. So I like Cameron Davis. You've mentioned him a couple times, Brandon, but I haven't really been able to pick up your vibe on him this week. Is Cameron Davis someone you are okay with in this event?
Yeah, like I said, I like Davis. I like Fratelli around 10,000. I just don't know how often I'll get there. But for Davis, was 8th here last year, very long off the tee, very good ball striker. So that's kind of what you're playing Davis for. And someone who can do that in a weak field, it always has some appeal.
Okay, who else do you like here in this mid-range?
Kevin Strowman at 9,200. He's like the opposite of Mckenzie Hughes, where he's a very good ball striker and not very good some other places. 88th percentile off the tee, 95th percentile in approach. The short game's not terrible. Coming off a missed cut at the Players, despite gaining 2.2 strokes tee to green, lost it all back on the greens. But he and Hughes are actually the best long-term golfers in this 9 to 10K range, according to my database. So that's got to be worth something.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that there is increased weight in looking at overall play when the field is, not as great, because you just want guys who are better than the field they're in. And if the long-term data says that Strowman and Hughes do that, I think there's a lot of value in that in a tier that is not ideal. So I think that makes a lot of sense. I am more into Strowman than I am Hughes personally. Another guy I want to discuss here in this mid-range is Brandon Wu, because it's a pretty weak field in general. So I'm okay buying into what golfers have done on other tours. And Brandon Wu is coming up from the Korn Ferry Tour, one of the better golfers on that tour, ranked second on the Korn Ferry Tour in both scoring average and greens and regulation, behind Will Zalatoris, who's obviously someone who's done well in the PGA Tour. Wu is not super long off the tee, so that's a bummer, but he's $9,300 in a tier that's not great. And in another weak field at the Puerto Rico Open, we did see Wu finish 7th there. He won the Korn Ferry Tour Championship last year and seems to be on the ascent. So I'm willing to bank on that upside in a rough field. But Brandon, I think that you tend to have a pretty good grasp on golfers who play non-PGA Tour events and how well their games will translate to the PGA Tour. When you apply that to Wu, what does it say?
I get the case. I get the form, the good finishes. It's just important to understand the context around that. So you mentioned the Puerto Rico Open, where he finished 7th. Data Golf has a field strength table. The average golfer in the Puerto Rico Open is like 1.5 strokes per round worse than the world average, let's say. For the Honda Classic, this field is rating out at a negative 0.4. So really not that close. Like a whole stroke better, which is pretty substantial. And then if you look at, the Korn Ferry Tour events, like they're way down there too, around, negative 1.5 generally. So it's important to keep that in mind. Now he is, the salary's 9,300. I think that's fair. And with the field still being relatively weak, it's not something that I would say you can't play him. I've considered it, but I just generally prefer somewhat more safety. Although, he could finish top 10 in a field like this, but I'm not quite there myself.
I think that makes sense. And like I said, I'd rather avoid this range altogether, but I think that Wu, if I'm going to go there, I want someone with upside. And because of the unknowns, I think the upside is there for Wu. Let's move down to the value range. And I think that the value range is much more attractive this week than the 9,000 range. So talk to me about the value range. Who is standing out to you there as of right now?
I like James Hahn at 8,700. Very balanced profile. One of the few golfers below 9,000 who's just kind of green across the board, let's say, where there aren't any red flags in his profile in terms of the adjusted strokes gain numbers. He's 60th percentile or better in all 4 adjusted strokes gain stats. That's what I'm looking for this week, someone who kind of does a bit of everything. He has 2 top 15s in 4 events since February, including the Waste Management and the Genesis. Was 41st at the Players. Good approach in all of those. And I think it's just a pretty good profile for the salary of 8,700.
Yeah, I think the Han makes sense. I am okay with him as well. No objections. My personal preference is actually for Zach Johnson. Usually you're more of the Zach Johnson guy.
Well, I'd have taken him, but you wrote him up first.
Oh, you would have? Okay.
Cool. Yeah, he's my favorite play down here.
Okay, well, let's talk about Zach Johnson then. Sorry.
No, that's cool. I didn't want there to be any disconnect on that one.
You didn't want your group text with Zach Johnson to get off the rails, thinking that you had disrespected him. Yes. You had to make sure he knew, as he's an avid listener, obviously.
Because we're live, he was. Yeah,
he was texting devil emojis at you, just super heated. And now I've ruined Brandon's relationship with Zach Johnson. No apologies, though, because I had to get him on the sheet because I think he makes a lot of sense. He ranks 26th in approach, 17th in scrambling, 22nd in Bermuda putting. So he's probably not going to gain strokes off the tee, and that makes it hard to have a great week. But I think he can have a pretty good week while doing the other stuff he does well. And the approach has been jacked up the past 2 events as he lost 10.1 total strokes and approach in them, but tougher fields, did enough elsewhere to still make the cut in both those events. And I think that that's valuable. He has not missed a cut since the PGA Championship last August. So getting that at $8,800 in a rough field, I can take it. So that's why I like Zach Johnson. Why do you like your boy, your best friend, your confidant, your boy, Zach Johnson?
It makes it. I don't actually like Zach Johnson as a golfer. Just good on Bermuda. Good irons lately, which is kind of why I've been talking about him for a while. Made 4 of 6 cuts at the course since 2014. So, and best long-term player below 9K.
Okay. Who else do you like below 9,000 for this week?
I'm gonna go with John Huh at 8,300. Good tee to green player, 94th percentile for me. Can be bad with the putter, but he jumps up on Bermuda. That's not quite as bad. Lost at least 1.6 strokes putting in 4 straight measured events, but he was golfing, like his putter was good before that, so it kind of makes sense. And he has 2 top 25 finishes at this course over the past 5 years. So for 8,300, I think he opens up a lot, and there aren't too many red flags. The main red flag with the putter being a little bit mitigated on the surface.
And putting matters a lot always. It matters less when you're $8,300. So I think that helps with a lot. My second low salary guy is Henrik Norlander, because kind of trying to decide if he's been broken the past 2 weeks or if it's just a blip here, because at the Arnold Palmer, lost 8.6 strokes putting, finished 71st. I was like sweating if he'd make the cut. He made the cut, and I kind of wished he hadn't. Then at the Players, he lost 3.6 off the tee, 2.4 around the green to miss the cut there. But before that, things were going well. He had 4 straight top 26 finishes, and all of those were backed up by gaining at least 2 strokes off the tee and approach, and 3. He gained at least 2 off the tee and an approach in 3 of 4 events. So I just said all of them were backed up. That was a lie. Regardless, our podcast, I can lie if I want. All in all, Norlander, 58th in distance, 8th in approach, 40th in Bermuda putting. He's $8,700. I'm okay betting on a bounce back at that number in this field. Brandon, your thoughts on Henrik Norlander for this week?
I looked at him too. I see the case for it. I played a lot of him. I don't look at missed cuts and care a ton, especially because he's like either missing cuts or finishing really well. So there's that volatility that I think pays off. And if we can lie, I can say he's coming in with 5 straight wins. So
we can. We can. Should we?
Probably not.
Different question.
But, yeah. He's someone I looked at for sure.
Yeah. I think that he makes sense. I prefer Zach Johnson, but I think that Norlander is someone I will use as well, because I'll be here a lot. But I'll also be okay with Ha and with Han, the guys you mentioned too. Win picks for this week. I had Webb last week. I know I didn't go well. I don't really recall who my second pick was. It didn't matter. It was terrible. Oh, well. Bunch of Muppets. Okay. Who are your win picks for this week at the Honda Classic?
I have to go with Henley.
Okay.
At 29.
Have to.
Well, I already bet him.
Oh, okay, cool.
I also bet Taylor Gooch.
Okay.
So I'm probably not going to go longer than that.
Yeah.
Like, I'll have sprinkles, but for this, for this, I'm going to go with Henley and Gooch.
I'm going Cameron Davis and Joaquin Niemann. I think the number on Niemann at 20-1 undersells him a decent amount relative to Sungjae, specifically less so Berger. I think that gap is just. I actually consider going Berger and Niemann. I think that Berger's defensible at his number. The reason I couldn't get there is because the increased volatility of the win pushed me off of him at a shorter number. But I think that you can justify Berger at 11-1. I'm not sure what your win sims say, but I think that's actually a pretty fair number.
My win sims say that there's value on Berger at 11-1.
How about that? So if not for the win, I would have gone Berger, but I will go with
Niemann's close. So
what's that?
Niemann's close to like break even.
Well, we'll go Niemann regardless, and we'll go with Davis as my win picks for this week. So you have Henley and Gooch. Henley 29-1, Gooch 35. I have Davis at 40 and Neiman at 20. That is all the time that we have for today here on the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast. But as mentioned, make sure you check out our NCAA Men's Basketball Tournament Preview Podcast with Dr. Ed Feng, Aaron Dolan, and Bennett Corcoran getting their thoughts on this year's field, talking about Gonzaga, talking about strategy, differentiating if you do decide to go with Gonzaga as your winner, and plenty of other thoughts just by searching for the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Wherever you get your podcasts, you can also find that over on the FanDuel YouTube page. Make sure you're subscribed in both areas, and if you like what you hear, leave us a rating and review. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
Gdula13, GDULA13.
Also, don't forget to check out Brandon's Q&A later today, 3:30 p.m. Eastern over on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Periscope pages. Get those questions in 3:30 p.m. Tuesday to drill Brandon on this week's Honda Classic. I am on Twitter at JimSannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always, and thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck to you at the Honda Classic. We'll talk to you again in the very near future. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire.